started. So we're up to Perek Gimel, chapter 3. In this chapter, which talks about the 10 soul powers and how they operate, there's basically 3 more detailed sections. One is how the 10 soul powers parallel their source, which are the 10 sfirot, which I see Larry has in his background. And the second one is the path, how to create love and fear of Hashem by meditating about him. Yeah. And then the third one is the idea of das, the third of the 3 intellectual soul powers, and how das is a key component in order to give birth to emotions that are lasting emotions, lasting positive spiritual emotions. So in the previous chapters, we explained what is the essence of the 2 souls that every Jew has. Every Jew has a soul which its essence is klipa, meaning that it covers over godliness. It hides anything that's holy. And the second soul is a godly soul. It's literally a piece of God. And in these coming chapters, we're going to explain the structure, meaning the different parts, the different components of these 2 souls, and how they operate and carry out their desired missions. So in chapters 3, 4, and 5, the Alter Rebbe will explain the detailed powers of the godly soul and how it connects a person with Hashem in all different ways. And in chapters 6, 7, and 8, he'll explain the detailed powers of the klipa soul, the animalistic soul, and how it seeks to operate and separate a person from godliness. And once we have this foundational understanding of the 2 sides, then in chapter 9, he goes on to explain, okay, so now that we know that every Jew possesses these 2 souls, so what makes somebody a tzaddik? What makes somebody a Beinoni? What is the description and so forth? And how does that actually play out in the battle between these 2 souls? So now, in chapter 3, he's going to explain the parts of the godly soul. So Perek Gimel, chapter 3, V'hinei, and behold, Kol Bechina Umadrega Mishalish Elu, every level, every element of these 3 nefesh, ruach, and neshama, the 3 parts of the soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, hulula me'aser bechines, includes in it 10 details, 10 parts, or 10 expressions. By the way, do you have the page with you online?
I don't.
Yeah.
It's I would assume it's just 1 page later than the last URL, which would be jewisharcadia.com/7882. So,
But also, if you're already on page 2, at the top of that page,
right,
there's a link to take you to next chapter 3.
Exactly. Or just put it in the chat. Okay. Anyways, moving along. So the godly soul in every single Jew is comprised of 10 elements. It's the 10 powers through which it serves God and connects to God. And these 10 powers are not only in one of the 3 levels of the soul, but in fact they exist on a different. They express themselves differently, but they do exist repeatedly in each of these 3 soul elements. So, in other words, within nefesh, ruach, and neshama, you really have 30 elements total. Now, each of these 10. Why do we have the number 10? So it's keneged eser svirei selyenis. It parallels the 10 supernal sefirot. So why does the soul have 10 levels? because the soul is created in the image of God, as we know in Bereshis, in the first chapter in the Torah, verse 27. God created man in his form. In the form of God, he created him. So what's this Tselem Elokim, the form of God, or often translated as the image of God? Not that one translation is better than another. It's when we refer to Tselem Elokim, the image or form of God, we're talking about the 10 supernal Sephirot. So what does this mean? So in Kabbalistic sources, it explains that although, of course, Hashem has no finiteness, he's not limited, and therefore he cannot be described by any description, right? Because any description you would give somebody or something means that they are that and not something else. So by definition, a description is a limiting characteristic, any description you're going to give. However, in order to create and conduct the worlds which are finite, God had to, so to speak, separate from himself or derive from within himself 10, or the word that's often used is to emanate from himself 10 specific powers, which are called the 10 supernal Sefirot. For those who are familiar, the world of Atzilut is where this begins. And what happened? Okay. And every Sefira, each one of these 10 Sefirot, is characterized by a particular function, by a particular characteristic. And that's so these 10 characteristics, these 10 Sefirot are what we're referring to when we talk about the image of God. Obviously, God has no image, but what image is there, if any? It's the one in Larry's background, the 10 Sefirot. So in other words, what we're saying is when we're saying God's image, we're not saying that there's an actual picture that an artist could depict, but we're talking about the godly energy, the godly power, the way it's formed and formulated and expressed in a specific type of characteristic. Now, since the human soul is created in the image of God, therefore, in the human soul, there also exists these 10 powers. Which they resulted from them. In other words, the 10 levels in a human soul came and by way of a process of devolution, it came ultimately from its source in these 10 supernal powers. In other words, the word hishtalshalut or nishtalshalu, they were nishtalshal, they devolved, means that the way the 10
Can you hear?
I could hear you, yeah. Were you asking a question? I just hear a little bit of background noise, but otherwise, no.
I can't hear nothing.
Okay, I'm not sure why that is. Larry, give me a thumbs up if you could hear me.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, David, you might want to restart your computer or something, but I'm going to proceed
toggle.
and it is recorded.
Just toggle the microphone icon. I discovered that I had mine disabled or I hadn't enabled it when I entered into the meeting, so I had to push that.
Well, in any case,
It's just very little.
We can hear you now.
not sure why that is, but I'm going to proceed and
Yeah.
we have it recorded regardless. So, the way these 10 soul powers of a person come from is they come from the 10 Sefirot, the 10 supernal expressions of God, and they come level after level. It's kind of like chains it links in a long chain, and every link is linked into the link before it and the link after it. That means that the 10 Sefirot have descended from their supernal level, and they were condensed until the point where a human soul is able to derive its energy by way of this link, by way of this hishtalshalus, all the way from the 10 the 10 expressions of godliness. In other words, what we're saying is not only do the 10 soul powers in a person sort of like commemorate or celebrate the 10 soul powers that God has and say, oh yeah, very nice. It's kind of like it resembles it or something. But actually, the powers of the soul themselves are the 10 expressions of godliness, the way they devolve into a new form in a person. So in other words, the 10 Sefirot really come down into a Jew's soul. So it turns out that when we said in the beginning of chapter 2 that the soul of a Jew is literally a part of God above, that its DNA, its ingredients is godliness, because it comes from the essence of Hashem. This is not true just about the essence of the soul and the core identity of what the soul is, but even the powers of the soul and the way it functions, they're kind of like a direct stream of the powers of godliness, of the Sefirot of God. Now, what are these Sefirot? So now he goes into detail. Hanechalakos lishtayim. The 10 Sefirot are divided into two categories: 3 and 7. It's not 5 plus 5 or 6 plus 4. It's 3 and 7. Shehain, which are shalish imais v'shava kfulais. 3 mothers and 7 doubles. What does that mean? So there's 3 Sefirot which are called mothers, because it's like a source for the other Sefirot, just like a mother gives birth to a child, right? And so too, as we'll see, the intellect gives birth to the emotion in a healthy soul, in a godly soul. The correct hierarchy, if you will, is that a person begins with intellectual ideas, and when those intellectual ideas are meditated upon sufficiently, it gives birth to emotions. That you have emotions and feelings that correspond to the thoughts and ideas that you contemplated. Now, what are the 7 emotions called over here? They're called kefulais. They're like folded. They're like doubles. Why is it called double? Because there's 2 ways that it expresses itself. It could express itself in a soft format or in a hard format. In other words, there can be a very intense revelation of these emotions, or there can be a weakened revelation of these emotions. And that's one of the reasons why they're called 7 doubles. But anyways, that term for the emotions to be called doubles or pairs is a term that's brought in the Zohar. We're not going to spend a lot more time explaining that, but there is a lot that has been said about this term. So now that we know that there are 10, the 10 not only parallel the 10 above, but they also derive themselves from the 10 above. And now we said within these 10, there's 3 plus 7. Let's start to name them. To Perush, this means to explain further, what are the 3 mothers? What are the 3 intellectual faculties? Chachma, Bina, Vadas. Wisdom, understanding, and knowledge or connection. Vishiva Simei Habinyan, and the 7 days of building, meaning the 7 days of creation, which are characterized by the 7 emotions, which are Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Chulu. Kindness, severity, beauty, etc. So the 3 mothers are Chachma, Bina, Das. wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And these are the first Sefirot. And why are they called mothers? Because they are the source of the other Sefirot. And then the 7 doubles, or the 7 pairs, are the 7 Sefirot of Chesed, kindness, Gevura, severity, Tiferes, beauty, Netzach, victory, Hoid, glory, Yesod, foundation, Umalchus, which is kingship. Where do we get these terms from? Who made them up, right? So it goes all the way back to the Book of Chronicles, which we actually say in davening every day after we finish the last 6 chapters of Psalms, between Baruch Shamar and Yishtabach. So we say a paragraph starting with Vayavarech David, and David blessed. And in there we say, Lacha Hashem Agdula, to you Hashem is greatness. Greatness over here is a reference to kindness. And then V'hagvura, V'atiferes, V'anetzach, V'ahoid. Those are listing the first 5 of the 7. Kichal V'ashamayim V'aretz. Everything in the heaven and earth. That's a reference to foundation, because when you're connecting heaven and earth, that's how you connect, giver and receiver, and that's connected with intimacy, which is the foundation for life. And then the verse continues to say, Lacha Hashem HaMamlacha, to you God is kingship. So, as we said before, these 7 supernal midas are called doubles because of the 2 ways they express themselves: a soft expression and a hard expression, kind of like what we find by human characteristics, so to speak. That sometimes the feelings of the emotions, whether it's love or fear, is revealed in its full glory, with its full intensity, with a great sense of arousal, and sometimes it's in a weaker sense, without very open outward emotions. Now, in addition to these 7, in addition to the title of Kfulos, doubles, these 7 emotions are also called the 7 days of building. In other words, from those 7 characteristics, that's what the world was built on. What does this mean? It explains in the Zohar that every single day of creation had its own avodah, had its own mission, so to speak, right? If you think about it, God could have created the world in an instant, right? What's the significance of creating the world in 6 days and resting on the 7th, which really is a part of the whole creation system, right? So the Zohar says that the 7 days of creation are Yomini Lain. They're like supernal days. In other words, that every day of creation, another godly light, another divine light shone from a different characteristic. So on the first day, Chesed was shining. On the second day, Gevura was shining. By the way, that's why you notice on the second day of creation, you don't have the words Kito, that it is good. All the other days, God said that it was good. But on the day of severity, right, that's a day of withholding. It's a day of limitation. You don't see that it's good mentioned in the Torah on the second day of creation. So what the Zohar is trying to convey over here is that whatever was created on a particular day of creation derives itself from the energy of one of those Sefirot. So, for example, Tuesdays, when grass and trees were created, that comes from the divine element of Tiferes, of beauty, and so on and so forth. Each day had its own characteristic, its own divine expression, which is where those creations get their source from. And that's why the 7 emotional faculties of the Sfirot, the 7 emotional Sfirot, I should say, are sometimes called the 7 days of building. Even though on any day the 7 emotions exist, the 7 emotions of Atzilut exist every day of the year, every day of the week, but they're still called days because of their association to the original 7 days of creation. That's how the world was, so to speak, built. Now, v'kach b'nefesh ha'adam, so too is how they're expressed in a human soul. Shenechalekes l'shtayim, they're divided into 2. The 10 soul powers within a human are also divided into 2 parts: seichel u'midas, intellect and emotions. Just as the supernal sfirot are divided into 2 categories, there's the Chabad mothers, and there's the 7 days of building, the 7 sets, if you want to call it. So too, the soul powers possess within them also this division of intellectual faculties and emotional faculties. It's interesting, actually, even though I kind of said just as a natural flow of things that the Sfirot above have emotional and intellectual faculties. That's not actually what we called them. We called them mothers and doubles, or mothers and days of building. But we didn't actually call them intellectual and emotional. It's only in the human soul that we're calling them intellectual and emotional. So what's the function of these 10 soul powers? This is the way, these are the mediums through which the soul associates with and relates to things outside of itself. And there's 2 ways of doing that, generally speaking. The soul is able to understand and perceive things outside of it through intellect. You study your surroundings, you absorb information, you gather data, right? That's the seichel of the soul. And then the ability of the soul to have a feeling towards something outside of it, that is through the power, the tool, if you will, of emotions. So from what we said so far, from that the Alter Rebbe said that the godly soul itself is comprised of intellect and emotions, we learn from here that a person does not possess only one set of seichel and midas. Meaning that the intellect and emotions is just one set, but actually in the soul itself, meaning in the godly soul itself, there's a full structure of its own of divine intellect, of holy intellect. That means a very refined way of thinking, to think and perceive godly things. And also there's holy emotions that could be excited and have a feeling towards godly things. And similarly, as we'll see later in chapter 6, right? Because 3 to 5 is talking about the godly soul, and 6 through 8 is the animal soul. The animal soul also, as we'll see, has its own structure of intellect and emotion. So basically, you have 2 brains and you have 2 hearts. But going back to the godly soul, because that's what we're focusing on now, the Alter Rebbe says, the intellect in a person includes wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Again, this intellect parallels the 3 mothers that we talked about in God's Sefirot. Now, what exactly is the difference between wisdom, between understanding, and knowledge? We'll explain in more detail as we go along. But just to finish off this thought, the emotions are the love of God, and the fear of God, or trepidation of God, and fear of Him, ulafarai, and to beautify Him, to kind of take pride in Him, etc. all of these feelings, the way they come into a human soul, they are the emotions. We'll explain more about these different emotions next week in Mitzvah Hashem. All right, so you want to say goodbye? Say bye.